progress.
Yeah.
Namaste, everybody. I welcome the viewers over here to the 9th virtual CP meeting on induction in civil services and future of US dollar and economics of war. Here we have CA Dr. Rajkumar Adukia Saab, Chairman of CPE Committee, who has come down here. He's also the Chairman of CECL and EA, the committee which has organized today's webinar. He has basically a lot of feathers in his hat. And I would just take 2 minutes to introduce to him. And from here, he would go down to his itinerary of introducing and taking it ahead. And then obviously I'll be throughout the session. So CA Dr. Rajkumar Adukia is BCom Honors, FCA, FCS, FCMA, LLB. I will talk about his international accreditations where he has done diploma in criminology. And he's also done a program from UNDOC, Advanced Anti-Corruption Prevention of Corruption. He's serving ICAI since 1998 and presently he is the CCM for the year 22-25 and obviously thereafter also. He is also the chairman of CPE as well as CDS Directorate Conveyor. Dr. Adukia left no stone unturned during his career span, expanding to more than 37 years. Wow. He is a pioneer of many areas of practice which were never thought before by professionals. He served as a president of GST Research Foundation. He is the chairman of Association of Indian Investors and vice president of All India Insolvency Professionals. He has mentored more than 1,000 professionals and written more than 300 books. So here we ask him to take it ahead, sir. Sir, please, if you can, bless us with your eminent inputs to us, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Salim, for the nice words about me. Friends, there are 600 plus viewers to this program, and I salute each one of you for sparing your time on Friday evening. We are very lucky that Dr. Sanjeev Chopra ji is with us. Dr. Sanjeev ji has spent 27 months as a director in Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. I consider this academy more than an Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard of the world, because here the most intelligent people who has helped in developing the nation, they have studied here, they have been trained here. And Dr. Sanjeev will be talking to us on a very interesting topic. So we will leave time more for Dr. Sanjeev to talk to us. I want each one of you, I'll take 2-3 minutes. Each one of you should become a thought leader. Thought leader means one who is seen, is speaking and writing on the passionate topic, whatever area you want to develop. I want each one of you to focus on non-traditional area, which are more than 50. So leave aside traditional accounting, auditing, direct taxes and GST. And we will train you how to get millions of rupees, how to write books on that, how to use social media to reach 500 crore people of the world without spending a single penny on reaching out to them. So you can connect with me one-to-one. I have told the ICAI team to collect all the email IDs. Deepika ma'am, we need to work on that to send emailers to all those viewers who have registered on our webcast. So far, today is a 9th webcast, which is very lucky number. So over to you, Dr. Sanjeev, to address us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adukia. Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. And I'm really humbled and honored to be invited by the ICAI to join you for this discussion under the forum of the CECLEA. My association with the ICAI goes back, I'm reminded now of the year 1989-2000. I was doing national management program at the MDI Gurgaon, and I did some work called Management Systems for District and for District Administration under the Director of Education of the ICAI, Mr. Gupta. My compliments and regards to him. And now I will just start the discussion. You see, friends, first of all, let's understand what is the IAS, and let's understand what is the deputation to the IAS from the state civil services, how they are inducted into it, why they are inducted into it, the processes thereof, and the recent controversies that have happened. You see, friends, takes us back to the time when civil services were organized in this country. You know, every country needs to have a bureaucracy. Now, whether that bureaucracy is organized by a colonial regime or it is organized by an independent country, one of the essential things about bureaucracy is that the selection is fairly transparent. Now, what the regime expects you to do is very different. But you are trained professionally and you are selected on the basis of an open competitive exam. These are the hallmarks of a Weberian bureaucracy. Now, compared to a Weberian bureaucracy, you also have other bureaucracies in which people are just appointed because the king likes them or because they have had the power of patronage. So there are many other recruitment forms. But in India, the ICS and its successor service, the IAS, the selection has been done through a very rigorous exam. It is because of the rigor of this exam that Dr. Rajkumar Adukia just mentioned, he gave us a very elevated status. And he said that the status of the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy is higher than Oxford or Cambridge or any other institution. And that is because of the competitive nature of this exam and because the system has been very transparent and very fair. You see, any system which is not transparent and fair cannot evoke respect. You can have power, you can have influence, but as far as respect is concerned, that respect happens. That respect comes only to institutions which recognize and acknowledge merit and have a very clear way of understanding how that merit has to be defined. Now, you see, from the very early times, there have been two factors which have been affecting the IAS. The first exam for the ICS exam was held immediately after the Queen's proclamation. The first time Indians made it, Satyendranath Tagore was the brother of Rabindranath Tagore. He was the first person who made it to the ICS. After that, it was followed by Surendranath Banerjee and some more. But the examination for the IAS used to happen in London, and it was very difficult, extremely difficult for Indians to travel all the way to England to take the exam. In fact, one of the Mr. Tata offered scholarships to all Indian graduates to go to England and take this exam because he was very keen that Indians should make it to the IAS and to the ICS. The Indian National Congress and all the associations before that were also arguing that the examination should be held both in India and in England so that more Indians could join. Now, because the cadre of the ICS was very small, and in those days, the ICS was doing almost every function. That is, they were doing revenue functions, they were doing civil functions, and they were doing criminal functions as well. Therefore, the people required to run the overall management of the state required many more people than the IAS or the ICS could have contributed. That is how the state civil services came into being, and it was called the statutory civil service. This is how it came into being. And very distinguished people have been part of this. Michael Madhusudan Dutt, and then Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, Srilal Shukla, so many very bright people joined the state civil services because of the simple reason it was very difficult for them to have gone across the 7 seas to have taken this exam. Now, so what happened was that as they rose up in the hierarchy, it was felt that, they should also be inducted into the hallowed frame of the ICS. And many changes were happening also because, during the interwar years, the number of people who could be recruited had become less. So in 1922, it was decided that about 20% of the induction into the ICS would be from the state civil service. And this is how the entry of the state civil service to the ICS system started. Incidentally, it was in the year 1922 that the first examination of the ICS was held in India as well. And it was held at Law College, Allahabad. And the examination was held over 45 days. Interestingly, in 1921, Mr. KPS Menon topped the ICS exam, thereby becoming the first Indian to top the examination, which was held in London. And it was an event of great significance, because here was an Indian who went to England and cracked the exam and achieved the first position. Now, our topic today is about the induction of the state civil service into the IS. Now, what was happening was that, you see, the difference between the IAS and the state civil service primarily lies in the fact that the recruitment to the IAS is done by the Union Public Service Commission, and the selection to the state civil service is done by the State Civil Services Commission. Now, what therefore happens is that the vacancies which come about in a state are a function of how efficiently the state recruits its people and what is the process of induction of people there. And that has led to a fair amount of confusion also, because there are states like Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu, where the state civil services are very well organized, and the promotions, vacancies are created earlier, and therefore promotions also happen much faster. The rule about the induction into the IAS is that, now 33% of the vacancies in the IAS have to be filled in from the state civil service. Incidentally, Morarji Desai was also an officer of the state civil service, and when he was the chairman of the Administrative Reforms Commission, which was appointed by Lal Bahadur Shastri in 1964, he had actually recommended that 40% of the induction of the IAS should be from the state civil service. Now, the challenges that happen are that different states have different patterns of examination and induct people into the IAS after different range of service people. So, as I mentioned earlier, in the case of Kerala and Karnataka, the promotions are much faster, and in states like UP, West Bengal, Bihar, the promotions are quite delayed. And this leads to a lot of problems, because, if you are joining the IAS at the age of 54 or 55, naturally, the number of years that you have as an IAS officer become rather limited. And therefore, you spend almost most of your working life as a state civil service officer, and only the last 6 years as an IAS officer. Therefore, you do not get that feel of belonging to the IAS. The idea, therefore, which I have been arguing and which has been doing the rounds from the year 2014 is that why can we not have a limited competitive exam for the members of the state civil service, so that their induction into the IAS can be much faster? In other words, can we have a system by which the state civil services officers can take the exam after putting in, say, 8 to 10 years of service, and they take the IAS exam, and those who qualify the exam, they can be inducted into the IAS. Now, the advantages would be that in that case, the induction to the IAS takes place by the time you're 40, 42, at best 45. So you will still have about 16 years to be in the IAS. And therefore, you will, the way we look at things is, we also look at how long do I have to serve. So if you're going to serve in an organization just for the last 3-4 years, typically the service career of an IAS officer or a state civil service officer would be 32 to 36 years. Mostly people would join between the ages of 24 to 28, 29, maybe 30. But this would be the broad range. So one could expect that typically a service span in the government would be for a period of 3 decades and maybe 2, 3, 4 more years. Now, if we have a system by which the induction into the IAS can be made in the 15th or 16th year, then the person who is inducted into the IAS will have at least half the period serving the country as an IAS officer. Another positive outcome of this would be that when you join at the age of 40, 42 into the IAS, the possibility of your going and working in the government of India as a deputy secretary, then director and joint secretary, is certainly much higher, because by the time, if you are inducted into the IAS, by the time you are 54, 55, there's a lot of reluctance to leave your own home state and to come and work in the government of India. And also, one would be very frank, there are adjustment issues. Children are at a various stage in their careers where they need attention. Parents also need attention. So it is not really practical for a person in his mid 50s or late 50s to go to work in Delhi for a period of just 4 to 5 years. Whereas if the induction could be done at a much earlier stage, say when the officer is still 40, 42, then the number of people would be willing to go and work in the government of India. Now, the logic of being in the IAS is only if you work in both the state government and the government of India. Because if you're not working in the government of India, then you are not really an IAS officer. Then you are basically an officer of the state civil service who is occupying certain key positions. The logic of being an officer of the IAS happens only when you work both for the government of India and for the state government. And this is exactly what Sardar Patel had in mind when he had created the IAS, and the IAS and the IPS and the Indian Forest Service, because for a country of our size, for a country of our diversity, for a country with so many languages and so many local traditions, it is very important that when policy is being made in the government of India, there should be inputs, valuable inputs from people who spend a substantial amount of time in the field. Now, typically the IAS officers and the state civil service officers, we spend the first 10 years, certainly in the case of IAS, in the case of the state civil service officers, up to 15 to 20 years, working in the field as subdivisional magistrates, as ADMs, as chief executive officers of Zilla Panchayats, as heads of DRDA, as municipal commissioners, as CEOs of milk unions or development authorities. So, and these first 8 to 10 years of the IAS and 15 to 20 years of the state civil service, these officers get an absolutely clear understanding of what the reality on the ground is. And the reality on the ground in agriculture, in animal husbandry, in fisheries, in rural development, in education is actually very different in Maharashtra, is different in Ladakh, is different in Nagaland, is different in Lakshadweep, is different in different parts of the country. So, when these officers come and work in the government of India, it is really possible for them to indicate and suggest that, look, this thing will work here, this thing will not work here, local resources can be mobilized on this issue, local resources cannot be mobilized on this issue. So that is the whole logic of making an officer an All India Service Officer, so that the views or the experiences that he or she has had in the state government can be transferred and made use of by the government of India. The current system of promotion from the state civil services to the IAS, if I could say so, is typically based on seniority, because given our evaluation system, almost everybody gets a good APAR. Earlier we used to call it ACR. Now we call it the annual open performance appraisal report. So almost everybody gets a good APAR or a good ACR. So everybody in the state civil services, if he or she has joined at a particular age, is likely to make it to the IAS by the time they put in about 25 to 30 years of service. Now, the alternate which I am proposing is that after the completion of 10 years of service, there should be a limited competitive examination from amongst those eligible to join those who are eligible to make it to the IAS. So let this examination be held every year, that people have 3 attempts in this, and at least 50% of the vacancies in the IAS can be filled in from the state civil service officers, which will mean that one, officers will continue to read and write and engage in thought, in their thinking, and there'll be an examination. And if they are fast-tracked into the IAS, it will not be on the basis of somebody's, because somebody knows a political person or this or that. It will depend on brilliance. It will depend on hard work. It will depend on merit. And this will not be the only only criterion. The criterion of, of service, the criterion of ACRs, all those things will also be there. But at least we'll be able to put this promotions on a track which will be more transparent and more clear, and thereby give the officer some control over his or her own destiny. As a matter of fact, my feeling is, you see, that this examination will also increase the gender parity, because I have this feeling that more women are likely to crack the competitive exam than men. I mean, in adequate ratios, and therefore this also might lead to a more positive, more diversified workplace that we have in the civil service. Friends, I can go on and on and on about this aspect and about other issues in the civil services. I would suggest that if we open up this dialogue, it will be better, because otherwise I'll keep on speaking, and so it's better because we have over 1,100 participants. So those of you who are in the state civil service or want to know any questions about the IAS, about various things in the civil services, what the civil services do, what the civil services don't do, so I'll be happy to interact with all of you. If that's fine, Dr. Khan.
So, as if I don't see any question also coming, because the backend office has been asked. The moment there are questions, they would immediately paste it on, for sure.
So is there something that we can discuss? If you have any queries, we can discuss that.
Santosh sir, you have something to say ahead? Santosh ji, you have something to say? Sir, you're on mute. Sir, you're on mute, sir. So you have to unmute. संतोष साहब आप म्यूट पर है, you have to unmute.
I think you should call him.
Yeah, the backend team will do it. Sir, one more thing, if there are, I suppose it's just a contemplation for men, but yes, there are fresh chartered accountants also, or newly registered chartered accountants who have also joined these sessions. For them, any suggestions how they can take, these competitive exams, especially the UPSC exams? What do you suggest to them? Because, after becoming chartered, it becomes like now the 95% of the people are career oriented. So they want to practice. That is the first thing, they look at. How do you ask them to, get involved with the, civil services, what they should do? What are the cutoff ages for them? What are the, other benefits which they can avail for going for the civil service examinations? For kind of an insight and an enlightenment for these people. Is there a provision for lateral entry you were talking about?
See, lateral entry and direct entry, there are two things. One is, you see, that CAs, those who qualify the CA exam are mostly urban based and mostly have a have a background in commerce and entrepreneurship. The IAS is primarily still a job where a lot of time is spent in the rural areas and in the more facility. And till about the first 15, 20 years, the competency sets which a chartered accountant has are not so relevant to the IAS officer. So, of course, towards the later part of one's career, one realizes that all the skills which a CA has in terms of organization, in terms of detailing, in terms of planning, in terms of PPP, infrastructure, understanding the value of money, all those do come in. So I would certainly suggest that lateral entry into the civil service would be a much better option for the chartered accountants. And lateral entry now this year, for example, in addition to joint secretaries, we've also recruited a lot of directors. About 100 odd vacancies of directors are also announced by the UPSC. So it can be done. Basically, what you require for all examinations, especially in the civil services, you require a very strong knowledge of the law and of the Constitution of India. So I think part of the, I would strongly recommend that all those who intend to understand governance in this country ought to be reading newspapers and ought to be, following the news and the discussions. So I think that is what needs to be done. And I would suggest that one should read 2 or 3 newspapers, because these days all newspapers have a particular viewpoint. Therefore, I think it's very important that as both as a CA and as a civil servant, you should be able to read 2, 3 newspapers to get 2, 3 editorial viewpoints, so that you can get to a more holistic understanding of what the reality could be. Incidentally, I must mention that my batchmate Anil Mukim was a chartered accountant, and he rose to be the Chief Secretary of Gujarat. I think he still continues as the head of the State Information Commission or something. He's still continuing there. So Anil Mukim is an inspiration, and every year there are at least 3 or 4 chartered accountants who qualify the IAS exam and join us. So you're most welcome to take this exam and have a different thing. And I think, these days you can also look at another way. Another way to look at it is, that why don't we get some actual life experience for the first 5, 6 years, 10 years in the districts or in the rural parts of the country, and then come up and take a corporate job. So it's all a question of interest and what you enjoy doing. You see, because fortunately today, India is a country on a high growth trajectory. It is not like my times, where opportunities were limited and employment was something which was, everybody was very keen to have a job. People are working because they want to work in a particular field. So I would certainly encourage, young CAs to take the exam. I have a question, how can a CA take up the UPSC, and what impact and what hopes you have? You see, I would again say that it's a very personal question. I mean, there are people who like to work in the rural, in the Mufassal, who like to work. You see, I would make it very clear that if you are interested in a corporate type of a job, then stick to where you are. It's only if you want to muddy your boots in the hard and toil, and thereby create something which is absolutely great. For example, I mean, when you distribute Kisan credit cards, and when you ensure that every single person in your district has been covered with a Kisan credit card, you feel a sense of great happiness. Okay. Now you see, so that is that's a personal choice, that you'll have. In terms of salary, the salary is okay. It is not as much as what a CA would earn. Therefore, that's also consideration. Now, the pros are that you can do very well, and you will have a great satisfaction of being able to help a lot of people, be part of the policy process. You'll be in the limelight. A lot of people will know you. Those are the pros. The cons are that you will be constantly under transfer. You'll be going to many remote parts of the country. There's something very interesting and very challenging about it as well. I'll just come to this. For example, when I came from Punjab and I was studying in JNU, when I got my first posting order, that was to a place called Purulia in Bengal, and I had not heard of that place. So going to Purulia was an excitement because, one had never seen these parts of the country, and one saw the beautiful sal forest, the lovely lakes, Ajodhya Pahad, Bagbundi area, tribal, So if you're interested in that sort of a thing, you get it. Next posting was to a place called Kalimpong, which also had not heard of before I joined the service. Next posting was in a place called Ghatal. So all the places that you get posted to would be places that you may not have even heard of. So there's a challenge in this. There is a joy in this. So it's a personal choice that you'll have to do. Now there's a question about. I think all competitive exams have something in common, and all competitive exams, the common point in all competitive exams is the focus on the syllabus and the ability to write the correct answer in that limited point of time. So I think that is common whether you are sitting for a medical exam or for the IAS or for the law exam or for your CA exam. I think that that does not change very much. So all those who can crack one exam can crack any other exam, and CA is one of the toughest exams in the country. So I'm quite sure that those of you who would be interested would certainly do very well. My own senior in West Bengal, Mr. CM Bachawat, is a very distinguished, was a chartered accountant, and is now a member of the West Bengal Sales Tax Tribunal or Commission. So I mean, there are many advantages. If you are a CA, you will certainly get posted to the finance department. You can get posted to the industries department because that is where your synergies will match. Certainly, the state would benefit a great deal from CAs joining the finance department and the commerce industries and other departments.
So could you also talk to us about, because a lot of people have heard that I don't know whether it's a myth or whether it's a fact that probation period is really tough.
No, not at all. Not at all. The probation period is one of the best periods in one's life because there is no tension, there is no worry. You are expected to attend a few classes and do horse riding, do swimming, do trekking, do mountaineering, climb the hills, bond with each other, develop your life skills. So it is the most interesting, the most beautiful part of life, because you still not been put to the grind of actually, working in the field. So you're in that intermediate zone. So it's a nice, and you are, I mean, the Missouri Academy is a lovely place to be in. And it's great fun. It's great fun to be a probationer. I think it's the best part of one's, of being an IAS officer is to be a probationer. When you are just being trained, you go for a Bharat Darshan, you go for so many attachments, you spend time with the army, you spend time with the Air Force, you go to Survey of India, and you go and meet the Prime Minister, and the President gives you a cup of tea. So it's a nice time. It's a very nice feeling. Those 2 years are really, really very important.
Sir, there is one question.
Carry on, sir.
Yeah. Sir, there is one question. Why the bureaucratic process takes so much time to arrive at a decision and the citizens suffer badly for that?
You see, there are levels and levels of decision making. In some cases, decision making is very simple. And I think with the ease of living and with the ease of doing business, many processes have been made much simpler than they were before. However, certain decisions require a large amount of consultation, especially when it comes to policy. Now, let me make a clear distinction between two things. One is there time being taken in implementing things which have already been decided, or is time being taken to come to a policy decision? Now, these are two very different questions. As far as question number one is concerned, if the state has a policy that these are your entitlements, whether it is for making a ration card or whether it is for making a passport or whether it is for industrial assets, if those things are laid down very clearly, then I agree with you, it should not take time. And I think we are moving towards a situation where we are being able to deliver services on demand as per the schedule, and there is the right to service commission and various other provisions which are helping that. A second aspect is about when you make a policy, and when that policy has a very large impact, that will necessarily take time because it will call for taking inputs from almost all the sources. And whatever you do, if you do policy A, you affect some people. If you do policy B, you affect other people. Whether it's a simple thing like using fly ash from thermal plants for brick making, whether it is about materials to be used for roads, whether it is about setting standards, whether it is about providing medical education in Hindi. So all these things are very complex issues. So this making of policy will definitely and should take a lot of time because it must engage a lot of people. But once it is made, then the implementation should be very smooth. I agree with you on that. And I personally feel that, thanks to the ease of living and thanks to the EODB, I think things have improved. Whether it is filing your income tax return or getting your income tax refunds or GST or various other things, I think things have, I feel that things have improved more in the last few years than they had in the last several decades.
Sir, one more question. Of course, it is slightly different from what we are discussing. But the question is that our profession, CA profession, has got a lot of accountability. And the compliances are to be done on time. Otherwise, the client is penalized. Why timelines are not fit for decision making in the government testing?
Well, this is true. But I think we are moving towards that. Stage. You see, we must realize that some things are within the control of people, of one or two individuals, and some things are the function of many people coming together to take a decision. Take industrial licensing, for instance. Now, industrial licensing is not just a function of the industries department. It's a function of the labor department, boiler department, environment clearances, power supply, water, pollution control. So many things are there. So, one has to understand that there are some decisions, the very nature are quite complex, and some decisions are easier to make. And of course, I think the CAs do a great job in advising their clients, and sometimes the CAs also help their clients in things which are not absolutely as per the law. So everything is there. So we have all kinds of officers, all kinds of CAs, all kinds of politicians. So let's not brush everybody with the same brush. Okay, now there's a question on which fields are required. Now you see what happens is that different departments bring out their requirements. For example, the Civil Aviation Ministry wanted somebody who would be an expert on aviation matters. The Agriculture Ministry had its own set. So the lateral entry position will be decided by the Secretary and the Minister concerned on what is that competence which is not being brought in by an IAS officer or from a professional in that field to that department. For example, in the case of Agriculture Department, we needed an expert on cold chain and logistics, right? Because typically IAS officers have not dealt with cold chain, we've not dealt with logistics, we've not dealt with the movement of fresh fruits and vegetables, right? It's a very specialized field. It's a new emerging field. Therefore, the post was advertised, and we got a very robust professional in the name of Bhuvnesh Kohli, who became the mentor director of the National Center for Cold Chain Development. So it is, so as far as lateral entry is concerned, it is very difficult to say that, what will be the requirement after 5 years or what would be the requirement after 10 years. Maybe we require somebody who will who will ensure that whatever is exported from India is compliant with EU regulations. So you could have a position coming up which will be related to this, So we cannot understand at the moment what would be the kind of lateral entry positions that are likely to crop up. But I'm certain that in many ministries and in many departments, there would be accounting relating issues, PPPs, international negotiations, several other things in which they might be requiring CAs who have worked in projects of PPP, for example, or CAs who have worked with the large international donor agencies, for example. So, let's see what emerges.
So I've posted one more question after that. If you could just check with that, please, sir, a request. It says, can
you please?
I'll paste it. Yeah.
Okay, this one. On opportunities available for a CA to help in policy making. Okay. You see, I think what the CAs can do is to examine the tax implications of whatever policy is being suggested by the government. Once the tax implications are, for example, what are the implications for let us say that the government is very keen on promoting ITIs because that will lead to skill development. Now, what is the kind of taxation that should be there for skill development institutes? What kind of incentives should be there for setting up skill development institutes? Because I think that is where the CS can contribute a lot. What kind of enterprises require what kind of tax reliefs? What is the general direction in which the flow of students is moving? So those are all the various areas in which the CS can provide great help to the government. You see, I think other than administrative positions, all the other work is done by CS. For instance, whether you are a DRDA, whether you are Air India, whether you are any other organization, a lot of, in fact, the entire accounting work has to be done by a firm of CS only. So the other thing is that there is a core competence which every organization has. I think it's very important for us to recognize that we should not move beyond our core competencies. It is better that we retain our core competencies. Administration also is a core competency of governance professionals, and they spend a lot of time in understanding. So I think we should, one of the things which is very important is that as professionals, we should respect each other and we should respect the professional abilities of the other person. Now, if we do not respect each other's professional competency, all of us will lead to a situation where the relationship should not be pleasant and the relationship should not be smooth. I, for one, very strongly believe that all professions, whether one is a chartered accountant or a doctor or a mycologist or a teacher or a postman, all of us have certain professional skills and we must respect those skills.
Santosh Saab, you may go ahead because I've exhausted the questions here. I'll post if some questions come down.
Actually, Sir Chopra sir, I have seen him working in West Bengal when I was the chairman of the food committee, and he had attended 2-3 meetings also and addressed us. So he is very thorough and very simple type of person and very straightforward. So one thing I have learned from him, that how to do the things, how to do it properly. And he in one of the meetings where 7 IS officers were needed to be present, all the 7 officers were present in that meeting. Sir, you remember we had it in Grand Hotel?
Yes. We had all the everybody from the agriculture.
Everybody from the department were present at the meeting, which is very rare. And it started in time and finished in time also. So, sir is very particular. When he gives time, he will meet you. But now it depends from person to person. There is nothing one can add or subtract about the individuals. But the way he has deliberated on the subject, his mind is very clear as to what he intends to do or what he has done while he was in the civil service. Sir, one more question. What is the difference between the state civil service and IS service, sir?
No, state civil services are recruited by the State Public Service Commission. They also start as BDOs normally, and they take a long time to become SDMs, and finally they also become DMs. But they take about 20 years, 22 years to become district magistrates. And in the IS, the promotion is on a much faster track. So an IS officer is selected by the Union Public Service Commission. Over 10 lakh people sit for the exam and about 400 people make it. So it's a very tough exam. So that makes, so the selection is very tough and therefore the training is tougher. And so it's a different, and IS officers can be posted anywhere in the country. Whereas the state civil service officers are normally meant to work in the state government concern. So that makes a lot of difference.
So one more thing I want to put forth. I've also met a lot of people who are formerly from the IS, who are currently in the IS. And what I have noticed that they are very particular. They are sophisticated in their work. Does this come because of training, or it is genetically into them, or this preparation for these exams develops them?
There is no genetic thing in this. all of us come from the same stock. There are two things. One is that you see the preparation is of course very tough and very hard, but more than that, you see it is a number of decisions that you have to take in a day. And whether you like it or not, you have to take decisions. If you actually visit a district magistrate's office or the office of the chief, they take the case of the district magistrate's office, he is got doing 100 things at the same time. There is a delegation here, there is something there. He is, looking at PDS. Then there is some fight happening somewhere. There is some fire that is broken out. So the multitasking becomes a second nature to us. It becomes a second nature to us that, we multitask. We multitask all the time. Second thing is, you see that because decisions have to be taken, and you are the last person, you are the last point, the decision has to be taken. So, as we are taught sometimes that between there are three possibilities. A right decision, a wrong decision, or indecision. Now, indecision is the worst, because indecision is, as they say in the Air Force, that if you are undecided, you'll be killed. So the choice, out of the three choices, indecision is out. So if indecision is out, if you are doing things, with a little bit of common sense, there's an 85-90% chance that you will come to the correct decision, right? And the most important thing in all decision making is bona fide. You see, at the end of the day, if your intent is honest, if what you wanted to do was good, I think in general people end up doing the right thing. And remember, there's always something called the conscience. There's always something that we know. It is wrong to say that I was tempted, I was this, I was that, I was that. Look, temptations can be there, everything can be there. But if you know that you have to do the right thing, it is not very difficult. I don't think it is very difficult to take the right decision. If you are clear that you do not mind a transfer, you do not mind being in any department, there is no problem. And I say this having worked with, and Rumtaji will share, that in Bengal we have seen the CPM regime, we have seen the Trinamool Congress regime, a big difference between the two regimes. And I have worked with the BJP government in Delhi, I have worked with the Congress, I have worked with Mr. Sharad Pawar from the NCP. I do not find a problem. I think the problems happen because many times in the bureaucracy, we do not give that adequate respect which is to be given, which is necessarily to be given to the political leadership. The political leadership has its own role. We have our own role. There should be no confusion in our roles. We are free to tell the political executive this can be done, this cannot be done, but it has to be said in a polite manner. It does not have to be, we do not have to be aggressive about it. We do not have to, pro about it. We do not have to go public about it. But let me tell you that whenever, at least in my experience, and across political parties, whenever I have gone and told the minister quietly in his own room that, look, sir, these are the implications of what we are going to do. 9 out of 10 cases are that we come to some sort of an understanding.
I'll tell you my experience. It is 10 out of 10 for the people, especially from the IAS cadre. They are very calm in their mind, very calm. Like they don't get irritated. They don't, they're not, aggression I've never seen in them. They're very decisive.
Joined, yeah.
If you can throw some light on, because I've read your profile, you were also the district magistrate in Murshidabad. So I know it's very tough being a DM because you're answerable to the people also as well as to whom you report. The party who is basically governing the particular state. And if you could go, without naming anybody, if you could give some highlights how you have handled things over there.
With practical common sense, open mind, and good communication skills. If you are willing to listen to anybody and everybody who comes to you, you must keep your eyes and ears open and your gate must be open, to let people come and tell you what is happening. You see, today and 100 years ago and 1,000 years ago, the basic norm about governance is information. If you have information on your fingertips about what is happening in your area, and if you do not close your channels of information, you will become very powerful. In fact, that is something which makes you more powerful than any politician, because a politician will get information only from one set of people. In the sense that if you belong to a particular party, the possibilities of, the people that you interact would 90-95% be from that particular affiliation. As a district magistrate or an officer, we will meet all kinds of people. So we will get all kinds of information. And if you use that information well, no, I don't mean use in a negative sense, but if you have all the information and if you can back what you are saying with law and with empirical data, things will be on your side. You see, half the problems are because we are anecdotal in our approach. Half the problems are because we feel so. We don't have to feel so. We have to argue so, and we have to argue on the basis of facts and on the basis of law. So, we are creatures of the Constitution. If the IAS officer knows his law and if he knows his facts, things are much easier. Much easier, because, facts is something which even the political leadership cannot confront you with. Now, if this is for example, if this is the amount of ration that is available in the district, this is the population, this is the BPL, this is how it's going to be distributed, it's very difficult for anybody to say, no, you send it here, you send it there, right? But you'll have to do your homework for that.
Sir, one question. Of course, how does the being an IAS officer affects the family life? It carries prestige, power, position, but ultimately, does it affect your family life also?
Well, yes, it does, because you have to put in many hours of the day, and that complaint is there. I suppose every spouse has a complaint that I suppose it's true for CAs also. It's true for everybody. So I think the IAS is not exempt from that. It's very easy to talk about work-life balance, but whichever work we do, whatever work we do, it is indeed very difficult to strike that balance. I also was not able to achieve it. And I suppose this is a professional hazard. But thank you very much, Mr. Rupda. It was nice of you to have called all our past association. Thank you, Khan sir. And thank you, Adukia ji. Thank you, Deepika. I'll have to leave now. But thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Okay, sir.
So that was Sanjeev ji, Sanjeev Chopra, formerly from the civil services. And his name, which describes him as giving life, love. So here you are giving life to the participants by giving insight to them. And I'm sure even if, 5 participants from here get through the civil service examination, that means you have done 200% of yours today in this session. And the questions that had come up, I'm sure, were really answered up to the mark. And you really did really well. So thank you so much, sir. I again
thank you.
Thanks to you on behalf of the entire committee on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot for accepting our invitation.
Thank you. Bye-bye, sir.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the entire fraternity of the participants.
Agento? Aso? Sa?
টাটা মেটালিক আর কিছু শেয়ার ছিল না, যেটা সার্জন থেকে ঘোরানো হলো স্যার, তার জন্য না সুভাষবাবু এটা ভুল করে ঘুরিয়ে দিয়েছিল 984। তো যে রেটটা আছে সেটা আবার রিভাইজ
I request Roonte sir to mute yourself, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. You are on. Please mute yourself, sir.
Am I audible? I have joined.
Yeah.
This is Shankar.
Now, thank you, Ankit, for joining. Now, I would like to introduce Ankit Shah, sir. He is born in Chennai and educated and trained at Surat and practicing in Ahmedabad right now. He is a peer review for the consortium of US universities, serving ICAI as a national faculty of DISA and CP conferences, serving as an advisory board member of JNLU Legal Incubation Council for the guiding and mentoring startups, won the national award as a upcoming young talent in the academics, research and department, served as an editor of 2 national level magazines, worked with IIM Ahmedabad as one of the youngest academic associate in the finance and accounting area and research associate for MBA curriculum. Welcome, sir. Please deliberate your session, sir.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Thanks ICAI and the committee and Adukya ji for inviting me for delivering on a very interesting topic, the economics of war and the future of the United States dollar. So before we start with this, I have a few questions for our viewers to think about the background of what has been through the history of the world. I can share my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep. All right. Everybody can see this chart?
Yes, sir.
Yep. So this is the economic history of the whole world from year 1 to year 2008 mapped over here. What has been the contribution of the countries to the world GDP? So I have a few questions to begin with. The very first question is that both these countries, India and China, they have such a massive population. I mean, if you jot down the top 10 countries with the highest population, you're not terribly surprised. First is China, second is India, third one is United States. And the distance between second and third is vast, not once, twice, thrice, 4 times United States population cannot make one Indian population. And this has been true for the whole human history of this planet for thousands of years. Very crazy. There has to be some strong reason. More than 50% of the world's population live here in South Asia. So that's the first thing. Second thing is both these countries, India and China, they have been very rich countries. I mean, if you look at this chart from year 1 till year 1700, that is 1700 years out of 2000 years, about 85% of the recorded history of the planet, you have India and China total giving more than 50% of the world GDP. That is how rich these two countries were. So the second question that I have is how these two countries were so rich. That's the second question. And what suddenly happened? And the third question that I have is what is going to happen next? I mean, if you look at this particular chart from year 1 till year 2008. So coming back to the first question, we have this massive population. I mean, this has been true for thousands of years of human history. Very crazy. There has to be some reason why we have such a massive population, both these countries. So the India was there on the southern tip of the planet. From there, it traveled and dashed with the Asian continent. And that is how the Himalayas were formed. Now, water is a basic necessity. So it comes back to geography. It is about the Tibetan Plateau that is called the rooftop of the world. That is the largest freshwater resource anywhere on this planet. And from that Tibetan Plateau, ran down all the major rivers of these two countries, the Gangetic Plain and the Indus River, where the civilization grew, and the Yangtze River for China. It is because of this massive freshwater rivers that this massive amount of population could be sustained. The next question is, if these countries had such a huge population, how these two countries were able to give more than 50% to the world GDP for 1700 years, that is 17 centuries out of 20, right? So this massive freshwater rivers deposited tremendous amount of silt on both the sides of its banks. And with that massive amount of silt, massive amount of agriculture was possible. Now, if you realize what human beings are doing on this planet for a major chunk of this 2000 years, economic activity was agriculture. Now, with this 50% of the world's population, you were able to generate more than 50% of the world's agriculture output. And that is how you had more contribution of more than 50% of the world GDP. That is how these two countries were so rich. What suddenly happened? Industrial Revolution came, and that came to Europe. Now, a person sitting in a European factory could produce 1,000 times more than an Indian and a Chinese worker. This is how 1 unit of their population created massive economy. Look at the precipitous fall. India and China fell down from more than 50% of world GDP to less than 5%, as you can see, right? So now the question is that if you want to produce 1,000 times more, you need resources. So Europeans devised a strategy. They conquered the important islands, the important port cities, the entry and exit points of the waters of these two countries. They slowly subdued India and China. They got the raw materials from here, sourced it back over there, produced finished goods, sold it all over the world, and that is how both the Western countries became rich. And both these countries, India and China, fell down from more than 50% of world GDP to less than 5%. You'll be surprised to know that the whole human history of this world is just about one main ocean, which is called the Indian Ocean. It's the only ocean in the world which is named after a country. You understand how important it is. More than 90% of the world's resources, oil, gas, raw materials, fuel, everything flows from this peaceful ocean. Now we understand it's a pivot of world economics in a way. Now, when you see these countries and look at this chart, I mean, in 1700, United States was zero. From there, it has gone and become so rich. Now, if you look at Russia, the gray one, you can see over here when it was Soviet Union, it was rich. Now it is down over there. You can see United Kingdom, when it had colonies the world over, it was so rich. This is how it has gone down here, right? So, and also what is interesting is the kind of chart and the narrative building which happens in the information, in the outlets of information, through the outlets of information. So if you look at this particular chart, and if you're wondering, as chartered accountants or CA students, you realize that on the x-axis, year 1 to 1000 is the same space as from year 1000 to 1500, and then from 1500 to 1600, 1700, 1820, 1850. So you realize when that portion of India, when it was one of the richest country in the world for 17 centuries, how the narrative works, where the graph is shrunk at that point in time. And then you can see when the West becomes rich, each of those the differences on the x-axis, how it is being zoomed when this kind of charts are being made in the West. So you understand that we had a very functional economy which was working very great. Some good advanced setup was working, all right, and it was working in our favor in terms of the kind of economic output we would be able to generate for the world, right? Now, the topic of the day is about economics of war and what the future of the US dollar is. And as we all know that after the Bretton Woods Agreement in the 70s, we have US dollar as the reserve currency status. Now, what does that mean when you have a currency which is a reserved currency status? The safest investment zone is automatically going to be the government bonds, the US government treasury and treasury bills and all, right? Because we are able to print US dollar out of just thin air, right? What happens if I can narrate you a story when I'm talking about economics of war? Say 5 friends went to a hotel. Now, one of the friends who happens to be United States tells other 4 friends that, look, all transactions that we do between each of us will happen only through US dollar. That is my currency. The rest of 4 friends say, all right. Then they eat in this hotel, and the US guy says, look, when the bill comes for payment, we are all supposed to do it in US dollar. The friends say yes. Now, supposedly there are 2 poor friends, and they say, we do not have US dollar. How are we going to make the payment? So obviously the US says, the US guy says, you will have to work harder, earn US dollar first, and then you are able to make any transaction. All right. 2 of the friends deny doing this. So these friends happen to be Iraq and Libya, right? So they say, no, we are not going to use the US dollar as the reserve currency status. And you know the outcome of that decision. So what happens is there's a complete artificial demand being generated for the US dollar, and the correct value proposition to the entire world, each and every country that has to do any kind of a transaction has to first earn the US dollar and then only carry out the necessary transaction, even between 2 or 3 countries or multilateral setup, whatever kind. If you need loans, again, those institutions are going to give you US dollar loans, right? So this is a kind of a complete boomed up artificial demand created for US dollar, which automatically makes United States richer. Now, the question is, how long can this thing go, and how United States is able to, keep, how United States is able to keep the, just hold on, sorry, I'm getting, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, okay. Let me know when is there, if there is any input or something anybody wants to say. All right. And if there is any question, please pose. You can raise a question when the discussion is on. From the current slide. Okay. So now the question is how US dollar will be able to continue as the reserve currency status after the Bretton Woods Agreement. So I have something what I called as a bucket theory. So the countries of the world are divided into 2 buckets, and how United States is able to keep the US dollar as a reserve currency. One set of countries, reportedly healthy economics countries, are running with the US dollar as a reserve currency. And there is another bucket of countries which are reportedly treated as rogue nations who are harassing the healthy bucket of nations. These rogue nations are indirectly supplied with US dollar and the arms. And the other set of healthy countries bucket, they feel that the rogue nations need to be punished, which is why they need to be sanctioned. And because of that, because of the clash between these 2 buckets of countries, the US dollar is able to continue as the reserve currency status. This is a kind of theory which I have understood over the years, in the last 60, 70 years, whatever I see happening, right? So, and in this one, when I see the US dollar going on as the reserve currency status, the weapon of sanctions is used on a bucket, and the other country bucket are going to get US dollar and the arms supply. That is how this goes on and on. Right now, at this point in time, when we are seeing the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we already know that a lot amount of Russian oil and gas is still being purchased by the United States, right? While it is propagating the Western allies and everyone to stop buying Russian stuff, including India, right? So this is how it just goes on, and they are able to sustain keeping the US dollar as the reserve currency status, because the Western allies would believe that Russia needs to be punished for the rogue behavior, which is why the healthy nations, the healthy Western nations, would continue with the US dollar, whereas the rogue nations are punished with sanctions. This is how it just goes on. And this is happening since last 50, 60 years. Now, I have a concept which I call as the US deep state, which I believe multinational corporations in defense, IT, energy, sectors, pharma, right? These are the sectors who are able to influence a lot of policies in the United States, which keeps running this foreign policy adventures, which keeps the US dollar going as the reserve currency status. Now, when we move on to the next slides, I will give a little bit of a briefing on how, multinational corporations are able to take benefits of globalization and penetrate into the economies of the world. So you can see these are McDonald's franchisees the world over. One of the benefits of globalization, which they get, globalization when we talk about, is free flow of all the factors of production, that is man, machine, market, and material, right? 2015, this is a chart of looking at the world in terms of, the principal submarine cables connecting the world, where, probably where we all get internet from. And this is the global transportation system, another way of looking at the world, where you see we are talking about global connectivity in terms of road routes, rail routes, air routes, connectivity. Now, these pink ones are US military bases the world over, 2015. And if we go 100 years back, these pink ones were the British colonies. So the only difference that we have seen in the last couple of 200 years is that the baton of leadership went from United Kingdom to the United States on the other side of Atlantic. Whereas you see it, if you're talking about a physical takeover of a geography, or you're talking about a military presence of United States, military coercion, or whatever that you call it. 100 years back, if you're talking about, from 2015 to 1915, you see in terms of connectivity, the submarine cables, which I was talking about, these all were owned by just one company, that's Eastern Telegraph Company from UK, right? So this is the kind of integration which we are talking about, connectivity, free flow of all the factors of production. What does this integration bring over a period of time? Your population is going to be habituated to foreign imports, and the more and more you are dependent on the foreign imports, the lesser you will be able to mitigate the negative impact of the influences which come from there, right? So some of the examples which you see, India, Pakistan, you see very less amount of trade, precisely the reason why we expect flare-up can happen any point in time. US, China, you see there's a lot of trade, right? So in the bucket theory which I make, I believe that the Chinese Communist Party is the biggest and the real ally of the United States, because I believe that when the question comes that who becomes your ally, the answer is that your trade partner is your actual real ally, because you're trying to economically strengthen the partner, right? Despite whatever the foreign policy statements in public and whatever photo sessions that you do in terms of foreign relations, the fact is that the countries with whom you are trading are your real actual partners. So the Chinese Communist Party led China, I believe, is the biggest ally of United States. Second is the Pak Army, which I feel is another extension of the US deep state itself, right? The United Kingdom government and the US deep state. This is the alliance which I see helps United States keep the US dollar running, right? So there are principally three main nations who are left, who challenge the US dollar as a reserve currency status. One is India, second is Iran, and third one is Russia. So Russia and Iran, they are able to keep under sanctions pressure, which is why they have become dependent on the Chinese Communist Party. And it is United States and the West which keeps China rich. And from there, the money travels to Russia and Iran. So as I said, you have one bucket of nations which is kept under sanctions. Reportedly, rogue nations are indirectly supported, whereas the healthy nations, in terms of India, it faces pressure from Pak Army and the Chinese Communist Party. This is how the US dollar, as long as India is under the pressure of these forces, these enemy forces, the healthy nations like India won't be able to challenge the US dollar reserve currency status. So the healthy nations are kept under this impression that, see, these rogues are going to come and bite you. And that is why the rogue nations need sanctions. And that is how the US dollar keeps on going, right? But it's a fact that whoever is your trade partner, your biggest trade partner, that is your real actual ally. So we see that the Chinese Communist Party is totally an export-oriented economy in China, completely supported by the West, right? Irrespective of whatever the public position that they take. Now, in terms of confrontation, China can pull the plug of the US economy. It has more than, along with Japan, it has more than 50% of the it holds for more than 50% of the US debt. The question is, how did China become one of the America's biggest bankers, and why did US allowed China to become one of the biggest bankers? So as exactly did I explain that the Chinese Communist Party and the Pak Army, I believe, are the extensions of the US deep state. By that logic, the CCP and the Pak Army were built by United States itself right from the 70s onwards, after the 71 war. And the Chinese Communist Party, up until 2005, they were able to pressurize Russia and sign off huge chunks of Russian lands in China's favor. So Russia, as I said, kept under Chinese pressure. Iran are kept under sanctions, so that's indirectly supported by the CCP, and India under the pressure of CCP and Pak Army. This is exactly how the US dollar goes on as the reserve currency status. Now, we'll see what future holds. So there are these cartoons which does the rounds of the economy in the diplomatic circles, where, if China is holding more, along with Japan holding more than 50% of the US debt, obviously Obama is the employee of the month, one of the cartoons. Now the question is, why did US allowed China, and what are the benefits? So one of the biggest benefit which United States derives, besides putting down India and Russia, the benefit which US derives is low-cost Chinese products. One, massive investment in the US debt by China, which means that US is able to give cheaper loans to Americans at a very low rate of interest, which pushes US businesses. That's the benefit. And what benefit China derives? China derives employment to such a massive population. So this is the give and take relationship which goes on. As I said, CCP is the biggest ally of the United States. Now, obviously, both can plug out each other at any point in time, but as long as the US dollar is the reserve currency status, obviously US dollar can be printed out of thin air without any finite base required out there, completely because of the artificial demand which is generated the world over. If any kind of transactions need to be done, you have to first earn the US dollar, right? Now, the unpredictable China now massively invests in the Middle East and African continent, from landmines to oil fields to ports and infrastructure. So as I told you that if you want to produce 1,000 times more, you need resources. And as I told you that Europeans devised a strategy of conquering the important islands, the port cities, the entry and exit points of these countries, and slowly subdued India and China. So right now, at this point in time, India and China following the same strategy which Europeans used so many years back. You cannot necessarily conquer these days. So what they're doing is they're using trade and investments and billions of dollars of line of credit to these island nations. China has taken up the Gwadar port of Pakistan. We have taken up the Chabar port of Iran. China has taken up the Hambantota port of Sri Lanka. We are trying to take up the Myanmar port, Sikaku Island. So this is exactly what is happening. So 100 years back, Europeans encircling each other, encircling the Indian Ocean. At this point in time, India and China right now following the same strategy, encircling each other in the Indian Ocean, just as Europeans did so many years back, right? We'll skip the globalization part, but what is important for you to understand is basically what's happened with the economics. So, yeah. So we have a domestic consumption of around 60% of GDP around 2016. So what that means is that our economy is 60% cushion to the global ups and downs. We have domestic consumption of around 60% of the GDP. China has around 36% of the GDP, and it is still declining. What that means is that any global ups and downs, it will have an immediate impact on the Chinese economy. The debt to GDP ratio for India for 15 was 67%. It's declining, which is great. The ratio for US is as massive as 104%. So this is what happens with a debt-based economy, a credit-based economy in the West, where it is supported by endless printing of US dollar just out of thin air, right? This is Indian current account. I'll show you. This is US exports and imports as percentage of GDP from year 1800 to year 2000. You can see how the imports, which is the red line, and then you can see the exports. So in the last 100 years, the role of United States has completely flipped from being a net exporter. It has become a net consumer in the last 100 years. This is how United States economy has completely flipped in terms of status, right? This is foreign born population as percentage of total population. You can see how this is the point in time, 12.9 by 2010. So we all know it's a land of immigrants, right? This is a bit hazy one. This is US current account balances as percentage of GDP. So from plus 6%, it went to minus 6% around 100 years time of 1906 to 2006. So minus 6% CAD, current account deficit. That you understand the repercussions on the US economy because of this. So in the last 100 to 150 years, the role of United States has completely flipped from, being, and when world is one economy, right? Some countries are going to run surpluses, others have to run deficits. That's how it works. So the speed of information few years back, century back, New Delhi and London went from 1.1 miles per hour to 2.46. Of all the securities traded in the London Stock Exchange in 1913, 48% were foreign. You understand that was a peak time for the British rule. UK's current account surplus was 9% of GDP at its peak. We just now saw on the chart around 2006, minus 6% for United States. The British savings were massive, and the exports of the British savings was a critical factor in knitting the world together. Now these guys do not have savings. So Britain was a saver, not a spender. United States has become a net spender. It was a net capital exporter, not a net capital importer. United States has become a net capital importer. Asia was colonized 100 years back, but today's globalization is enriching Asia. Now, if you compare further, governance was based on political power. There were different institutional framework. There was no WTO, World Bank, regulators or institutions. There was mass migration from the west to the east. Now it is towards the west, right? FDI was not there. It was about portfolios and not subsidiaries. Money was gold in terms of immutable exchange rates. When it was hooked to gold, now it is US dollar. Now in the current conflict, Russia-Ukraine conflict, we are seeing that Russia and China are willing to go back and hook their currencies back again to gold. There are some whispers about it, but let's see how far it goes. But in terms of the future of the US dollar, it is more than clear that by the end of this decade, the US dollar is going to be facing a lot of trouble in terms of reserved currency status, because countries after countries realizing that they have to work their ass off the entire life just to earn US dollar to make a transaction, right? So the world is not able to have the correct value proposition of the value addition that they do, each of the countries, and that is going to be challenging for the US dollar in the very near future. Now, I would like to highlight some of the recent events which has happened. These are with dates and timelines, so you understand how the US dollar is going to face pressure, more and more pressure. Now, you can see 14th December, United Arab Emirates cancels an F-35 deal. I again explained you previously how the US deep state functions. It's an amalgamation of defense, energy, IT, and pharma companies, which define a lot of the state policies in the United States, where they are able to sponsor not just authors and professors, politicians, and reporters in media as well. So a lot of influence on the policies happen from the companies who are totally aiming just on profits. So defense companies do fall in there. So 14th December, United Arab Emirates cancels an F-35 deal, aircraft deal. 25th Feb, United Arab Emirates buys L-15 planes from China. Now this is reportedly understood to be a US ally country, United Arab Emirates in the Gulf, in the Middle East. Now, how it is slowly shifting out of the United States influence, you can say. 5th March, US gets UAE listed in the FATF grey list, which is for money laundering and funding of terrorism, etc., kind of, scrutiny, compliances, etc. So you need to understand that before the two buckets theory, which I explained, that a group of country which are reportedly rogue nations need to clash with a healthy economics nation, and the healthy economics nation feel that the rogues need to be punished with the sanctions, and which is why the healthy nations continue with the US dollar. So when the Ukraine-Russia conflict, it clearly helps the United States, because all the reconstruction contracts are going to go to the United States. Companies, once Ukraine is destroyed, I mean, they won't spare a single building, it looks like. So all the reconstruction, humanitarian aid, all these contracts are going to go to these deep state companies in the West. Not just that, you realize that the sanctions on Russia would further help the US dollar. So this goes very scripted. Russia depends on the Chinese Communist Party led by leading China. So, and the US continues trading with China, right? So what happens is the fund flows to Russia. So there's an indirect supply to Russia, right? And then Russia is kept under direct sanctions. The European allies are fooled that Russia is under sanctions, and that is how it just goes on and on. So this Ukraine-Russia war clearly helps the US dollar. And reportedly, my reading is that, in the coming months, we'll see China, Taiwan as well. So that as well will be scripted by the US deep state, and that also helps the US dollar going. But what is not going to help the US dollar going further is about the alliance between India, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. This is the grouping which has strengthened in the Middle East geopolitically. And the aims are very common, which is, one is the Iranian regime change, and second is the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. These are the targets this alliance is looking for, that is Saudi Arabia, UAE, India, and Israel. Now, this alliance has overgrown United States direct influence, which is why you see United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia coming out of the influence clutches of the United States. Now, my understanding is that this grouping, United States realized that this grouping is going to disturb the bucket theory. I mean, if POK is solved and Iran regime change is solved, then the healthy nations like India and Israel won't take much time to dump the US dollar. As soon as the healthy nations are free from the rogue nations problem, they are immediately going to take the next step of taking off the US dollar from the reserve currency status. So this is the grouping which is now paining United States deep state companies. So United States realized that when it went for scripting the Ukraine-Russia war, it forgot to lift sanctions, the nuclear sanctions from Iran. So to rectify that mistake, United States listed the United Arab Emirates in the FATF grey list, right? So that became a double mistake. Now, what happens if you look at the timeline? 5th March, Delhi sends the Israeli Prime Minister to meet Putin in Moscow. On 6th March, on Israel's nudge, Russia asked US to make sanctions on Russia ineffective in Iran deal-related business. 8th March, Saudi and UAE refused to take phone calls from Biden. Now, these are the two countries reportedly now, I can say, ex-US allies. These two countries refused to take the call of the US president. So you understand that 4 countries, India, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, have made a very strong alliance since 2017 in the Middle East, and now they are not listening to what the US deep state wants to say, right? On 12th March, the MBS, who's the crown prince in Saudi Arabia, he is the most vulnerable in terms of physical security, that particular guy. So there are good chances that he would be attacked. So he executed 81 criminals in a single day to send the message to the Al Saud family members and the radicals to stay in their limits. On 13th March, India and China agreed, I believe, secretly on lot many things, nothing being declared. On 15th March, India asked Saudi Arabia to consider oil deal from China in yuan instead of US dollar. Now, you need to understand, after Russia, it's Saudi Arabia and UAE. If these top 3 countries stop trading in US dollar, right, with Iran being under sanctions, then US dollar would be under trouble, right? 16th March, India also considers Russian deals in yuan as well as rupee-ruble arrangement. 16th March, Belarus Stock Exchange declares to trade in yuan. 17th March, Saudi UAE declare Blinken will visit from US. He needs to apologize for the listing that they have done of UAE in FATF. 18th March, India finalizes rupee-based transactions with Myanmar and Iran. 18th March, Russia gets guarantees from US to get sanctions waiver on Iran deal. 19th March, Saudi UAE cancels Blinken's visit. No, so they declared Blinken will visit Saudi UAE, and then Saudi UAE cancelled his visit. Now, nervous Biden sent Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, Saudi and UAE, but both the crown princes refused to fill in the gaps of oil supply arising out of the Russian sanctions. So this alliance is not listening to the US deep state. So a lot of these maneuvering, I believe, is happening from Delhi, and there's just few years left before the US dollar would be questioned. And UAE on 20th March welcomed arch enemy of US, Bashar al-Assad. So this is how the United States dollar is going to face trouble in the future. We have, let me just slide. Okay, let me explain you a little bit on the debt to GDP ratio, because this debt-based economy, which is the fundamental problem that the countries of the world face by keeping especially the Western countries, by keeping the US dollar as a reserve currency status. So you'll see debt proportions, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain over the next 30 years. By 2040, the Portuguese debt to GDP ratio becomes 275%. Irish 300%, Greek 400%, and Spain 300%. This is a debt to GDP ratio. United Kingdom, it will explode to 500%, and for the United States, it becomes 450%. What that means is that by 2040, unless the central bankers radically change their course from this debt-based economy model, all the federal tax revenues will be consumed by debt service for these Western nations. You understand the implication of all the federal tax revenues being consumed by just servicing the debt which is taken by the federal government. That's how difficult it's going to be. And if in case, as I read, by the next decade, if you look at trillions of US dollars already printed being shipped back by countries of the world back to United States, you can see staggering inflation in the United States because of this. Now, there could be many other reasons for the economic crisis which countries face. If your GDP does not grow as fast as your debt does, then again, that is a problem. If your economy is inherently weak, that is another problem. Inherently weak economy means your domestic consumption is not a significant portion of your GDP, right? Which is a lot of this has to do with the family unit economics, which is, I mean, if you go to an economics class, you what they are going to tell you is there are two economic theories. One is capitalism and second is communism. Now it happens to be that Arthashastra is the world's first economics book. So and both these economic theories which are being taught in class, that is capitalism and communism, shockingly do not have the word family even once mentioned in their entire theories. Not even once. Now we all understand that every family decision is an economic decision as well. So you have to understand that this debt-based economic consumption model is not going to work for long. Now there's another narrative which goes on in the world, which is about the per capita income, that the per capita income has to be high. Now those countries which have which believe in family unit economics, right, where you consolidate all the income and the expenses per person of the member is split because you're living in a family unit. Now, this perspective is not being counted when they talk about the per capita income of countries, because this comes from the Abrahamic thought of just one life concept of the West, where they believe that everything needs to be consumed. There's a whole pressure of buying brands, unnecessary brands, where a dog and a person is considered as a family. That kind of concepts, right? So that's where this per capita income concept comes from. You don't need a high per capita income for a country which believes in a family unit economics where expenses are split among the members and income is consolidated, right? So there are multiple flaws in the kind of economic theories that we study in class, directly imported from the West, especially the capitalist and the communist model, where United States is considered as a free market economy based on capitalist model, where you still find that the aged parents are given Medicaid and free reimbursements from the state. If it's a free market economy, why would you distribute freebies, right? Because freebies is a part of a communist model. It's not a part of a capitalist model. And when you look at countries like China, which talks about communism, communism means no private wealth. Here is a country which talks about communism, but it has totally an export-oriented economy, and the Chinese Communist Party members stash their illegal and legal wealth outside Chinese borders in the West, right? Where communism says no private wealth, right? So none of the two models are actually following their models. So these are the kind of the wrong and the challenges these economic theories face when they talk about free market economy and things like that. You have unemployment benefits in United States which are being distributed. I mean, why would a free market economy require freebies, right? So it's going to face a problem. Now, what happens when countries face this kind of debt crisis because of this? One of the way out is pushing the economic growth. So the growth, you have to lower the interest rate on the borrowing so that investments kick up, new businesses start, and which runs the cycle of the economy. Second option is that you bail out. One of the easiest to route, but there's a dilemma how much and what number of businesses you are going to bail out, and how many freebie checks you will be able to distribute to the businesses or even the individuals. I mean, not all countries are having the privilege of having a reserved currency you print out of thin air and start distributing among the people, right? So bailing out is another one. Fiscal pain, increase taxes and cut the public expenditure is another method. Printing money, which I said is it happens in United States and several European countries now and then. Last option is to default. That is a fancy word for repudiation, standstill, moratorium. Call it a restructuring or a rescheduling. Boils down to one word, which is default. So this is how there are different ways out of the debt crisis, which are temporary solutions. But if you're looking at doing something kind of a macroeconomics, I mean, especially the countries in the Gulf, you see the free crude oil reserves are 30 years stock which is left. After which, if they want to do economics, they will have to go to a liberal, non-religious, secular way of living if they want to have any kind of pure economic activities to make their money from, right? So, and similarly, United States, when United States will not have US dollar as a reserve currency, there are going to be a problem, serious economic problems, right? So cut, print, or default, and there's only one case which is successfully able to handle a debt crisis, and that is Britain after 1815. But we have to understand that even in that case study, Britain was having numerous colonies to suck their money from, which helped them solve this problem. So it had all the benefits of industrial revolution as an addition, besides the entire big empire from the world to draw on. So what happens if you don't pay and default on your debts? What are the geopolitical consequences of the crisis of public finance? The very first is that you won't be able to spend on your defense. That's the first hit that would take. Now, in 1914, these were some of these crisis factors. We see hegemony of Britain, escalation of rivalry between great powers, destabilization of the alliance system, and existence of rogue regimes sponsoring terror. Now, similar kind of causes we still see these years. So, and United States at this point in time is facing the highest level of inflation rates it has ever seen in history. So a lot of trouble, economic trouble, because it's no economics. I mean, if you're relying on a currency which is completely an artificial demand, you do not have a strong backing, which is a correct valuation for your currency. It cannot hold on for longer periods. Definitely, the Bretton Woods Agreement will fall within a decade, and after that, the Americans will have to start working. I mean, those weekend offs and vacations are going to be the things of the past, when the whole world is not able to take any more burden of sponsoring or your holidays. This is what is going to happen. I have some examples of what happened in Brexit. But one thing which is very clear in terms of, which is very great for the Indian economy, is that by 2047 we would be again back to be ruling the economics. I mean, we have been generating, along with China, I mean, even individually, 27% of the world GDP for 1700 years. So I see that happening. By 2029, the GDP of China will equal that of United States and will start declining from there with their 4-to-1 crisis, which is 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and 1 son, earning member in the family, and 6 dependents. So with that, and about 40 million men without any woman to marry, this is what the Chinese Communist Party-led China is going to face from 2029 onwards. Because of their single child policy, which was reversed a few years back, but the impact cannot be reversed from 2029. This is what China is going to face, the Chinese economy. So if you're spending more on your debt than on your defense, it's all over as a world power. All countries are having massive aging population, and the next 3 decades is Indian decade in terms of, I mean, you can supply the men, which is the main material of the factor of from all the factors of production, of well-nurtured men. So the next 3 decades, this is a time when India has to come back to the economic position which we were. I think that's all for the day. We can take questions now.
Yes, sir. So, what would be the preferable? Should I send it over your chat box, or I can read it out for you?
You can put it on the chat box. That's okay. I'm reading the chat box.
Yes, sir. The first question is sent, please.
Will the rupee keep on its downward trajectory in the current world the rupee will keep going down in terms of US dollar for the short term period, but in the long term, as we see that this is a lot to do with the geopolitical positions in the world, especially if the countries are able to solve the rogue bucket problem that they are facing, then the healthy nations can shift to a world and ask and take steps towards a world where they are able to get the correct proposition of the value addition that they do to the world. So to have that correct valuation of the contribution that you do to the world, you will have to solve the rogue neighbor problem that is being sponsored by the US deep state. So if you're able to solve the POK question, and the Saudi and UAE and Israel are able to solve the Iran regime change question, the US dollar will face serious problem as the reserve currency status. So for short term, yes, the rupee will depreciate further, but in the long term, I think if we are moving towards a position where the countries of the world are going to challenge the US dollar as the reserve currency status. What consequences would India might be conditioned to face if UAE ally succeeds? UAE ally succeeds. I mean, Saudi, UAE, India, and Israel. You are talking about. That's what I explained. If the four countries
Yes, sir.
alliance are able to solve the POK problem and the Iran regime change, then very soon UAE is seen as a logical extension of ancient India, where I see, I mean, if I'm going to talk about, I mean, it's going to be a religion factor here as well, where I see that by 2040, UAE becomes the first Hindu majority country in the world, where Saudi Arabia becomes the first Jewish majority country, and Iran becomes the first Christian majority country in the Middle East by 2040. That is what I'm seeing. So, I mean, if you talk about some of the brief history of how religions and dharmas came about, all that we have on this planet is only Jammu and Jerusalem, because the Indus River, the Jammu belt gave two dharmas on Ganga and two dharmas on Indus. Similarly, the Jerusalem belt gave two religions, right? So I believe that Jammu and Jerusalem are going to meet as a melting pot in Saudi Arabia very soon. So I see that as a logical extension of the Indian subcontinent on one side, that is Saudi Arabia and UAE, and Indo-Pacific on the other side. That's how the influence has always been for 17 centuries of the world. I mean, whatever aberration has happened in the last 300 years. So I believe we are going to get back to that position by 2047. Will India have financial freedom? All countries will have freedom from from working to earn the US dollar. Yes, that's going to happen, because this bucket theory cannot go on for very long. What do you feel Taiwan will be merged with China? Taiwan is officially a Chinese territory. They need not, I do not believe what other experts say, that it has to be a military takeover, because I believe it already is a Chinese territory. So what I see is that China would be looking for a quota for the Chinese Communist Party in the political rule of Taiwan rather than a military takeover. I do not see a military takeover of Taiwan. I see a political takeover of Taiwan. And POK, yes, POK will happen soon, very soon. United States have not let any country surpass it. Japan was ready to take over the same way as China has spread. Will US be able to stop China? US and China are biggest allies. So that's not what is in public consumption, but that's exactly what it is. So the Chinese Communist Party was entirely built and trained from scratch by the United States after the 1971 war, right? And it still is, okay?
Hello. Ankit sir. Hello. Ankit sir, are there? Hello. Ankit sir, I'm audible to you?
It got disconnected.
Yeah. So I dropped few more questions that you got.
Let me check.
Proceed again.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay. United States have not let any country surpass it. Japan was expected to take over. Okay. Will US be able to? Okay. As I told you that the Chinese Communist Party is their biggest ally. All right. So there is no way that China is looking to, US deep state is looking to cut those ties. So if they wanted to cut those ties, the very first step that they would take is cut all the economic ties with the Chinese Communist Party, which can bring down, it can make around 40 to 50% of the Chinese population unemployed if they wanted to. They are not serious because those two are the biggest allies, as I told you. When will the US dollar likely to depreciate and by how much? So as I told you, by the end of this decade, it is expected that it will be no longer the reserve currency status in the world. So it is going to be highly depreciating. It is difficult to predict which year and what circumstances, but one thing is clear, that if the rogue bucket problem is solved, primarily being POK and the Iran regime change, the very next step, the healthy nations, that is India, Israel, and the crude oil countries, which are having around 30 years of crude oil stock left, they too want to come out of this US dollar problem. So it's coming in the few years. Any more questions?
No, sir. And that's enough for the day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right.
This was very useful and knowledgeable to the participants, as everyone liked it. They are getting so many
Do we have any other questions?
insights.
All right.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your valuable time, sir. Thank you.